Welcome everyone to Meet Virginia Wing. It's an exclusive Q&A where we're going to have a conversation with Virginia, and you'll get a chance later to ask her questions about herself, or you can ask me about our upcoming project, Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing. I'm Larissa Lam. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is amazing. Many of you know me as the director of Far East Deep South, a documentary about my husband Baldwin Chu's family search for their roots that led us to Mississippi, of all places, where we got to meet many of you who are Mississippians over the course of our journey and uncovering the history that we never knew about the Mississippi Chinese. And so I'm really grateful for the support that all of you have shown us over the years. And we're really, really excited to be moving on to this next project, which we always say we're expanding the Mississippi Chinese universe, our own MCU. And so I am directing Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing about our lovely interviewee today, Virginia Wing, and her story growing up in Marks, Mississippi, but also about her career that has spanned many, many decades. She is here still working, living in New York, and she's just a model of resiliency in terms of having this amazing career. And so without further ado, let me give you a brief introduction. It won't even do justice to what Virginia Wing has accomplished in her life here. Virginia Wing was born in 1937 in Marks, Mississippi. She is 87 years young. She is an actress and singer with over 200 theater, film, and TV credits. She co-starred in the acclaimed 2023 Off-Broadway production of Uncle Vanya, alongside Tony winners David Cromer and Bill Irwin, and Will Brill, I should say, who won a Tony after that production. In 1959, she made history as the first person of color to compete in the Miss Mississippi pageant, and her career began as a chorus girl in West Side Story, performing with the future Broadway legend Tommy Tune, who I've also seen in productions live. An early contributor at LA's Inner City Cultural Center, she worked with talents like George C. Wolfe and was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. She has appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and in TV shows like Hawaii Five-O, Law and Order, Gotham, Third Watch. Please give a virtual welcome to Virginia Wing. Yay! And the crowd goes wild. Hi, Virginia.
Hi, how you doing?
You've seen me a lot. You've had to deal with me a lot because I've been following you around and researching you. So I'm really glad you could join us today. First off, I think there's a lot of people that'll be interested in hearing a little bit about your upbringing in Marks, Mississippi, because they may have seen our story in Far East Deep South, but as we like to say, our story is only just one of the stories from the Mississippi Delta, and there are some, variations. And of course, you actually grew up there, born and raised, and so I'd love to hear some of your earliest memories of life with at your family's grocery store.
Oh my goodness. Well, we lived in the back of the store. Um, I remember Sundays, on Saturdays were very, very busy. So my parents always slept in on Sundays. So my older brother and I would run out into the store from our back living quarters and eat candy like crazy and hide the wrappers away. And then, if you guys remember, there were soda water boxes with water to cool off the sodas. So all the sodas were sold off, and so there was this water in a box, and we would go swimming in the box. And then once they used to hang banana stalks in the window, and so the stalks were gone, but the rope was hanging. So we were playing trapeze, and I happened to get one leg in, and I slipped, and I was hanging by one leg, and it was about 10:30. So all the crowd of people heading for church came across the window, and the thing was hanging in the window. So there I was swinging by one leg, and they were outside pointing and laughing at me. So that's one thing I remember very, very.
So you didn't end up going into the circus business because of that, right? After
No, no,
that.
no.
But you did. You told me a story about how you used to dance on something in the store, though.
Yeah, I used to sing and dance on the ice cream box. And when I was about 3 years old, I started it. And the salesman would come in. So I knew to sing when they came in. So they would give me money uh, after I sang. So it was my first professional gig, I guess.
So yes, you literally got your start in your grocery store singing and dancing.
Yeah.
Um, give us a little sense of Mark's. I mean, I know having gone there with your family and filming, and you know we got a chance to see your store, which we filmed for the documentary. You told me Mark's was a little bit different than some of the other Delta towns, and that they were a little more accepting of the Chinese. They were earlier to accept the Chinese compared to other Delta towns. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that and how your experience contrasted with some of the others that grew up in the Delta?
Yeah, my ancestors, my father's uncle was a Pang. Our surname actually is Pang. So he got to Marx very early, around the turn of the century. And the richest guy in town, Mr. Self, and he became friends. So the rest of the town really accepted him, and because they were friends. And he had 11 children. So there were a lot of little pangs there. Some of them went back to China. But my father came to Marx and went to Chicago, married my mother, and came to Marx. I think also because my mother was born in Chicago, and a lot of my friends, their parents had just come over or had come over from China. So she was a little more Americanized, I guess. So it was kind of a easier transition for us. And I don't know, we were always accepted in the white society um,
Uh,
ever since I was very young.
Compared to some of the other towns where some of the Chinese were not allowed
Yeah. And we
to
were allowed into the white school um,
from
since I
from an
was,
earlier age. Yeah, well, that's the part that I found that was interesting about Marx, and how it differed, from town to town. That I mean, even if you look at our region today in the United States, things are not applied and people's attitudes are not the same all across the country. So even within Mississippi, it was interesting to hear that from you. That people have heard from others in our film about their very negative experiences with the white community, and you had a very different experience in that regard.
yeah.
Can you also talk about um, your story being kind of positioned between both the black neighborhood and the white neighborhood, and uh, this concept of, I know a lot of people asked us about this in our film, people giving credit, your parents giving credit to a lot of the customers when they weren't able to pay.
It was situated where people would pick cotton and they wouldn't be paid until the end of the season. So they had no money to pay um, during that period. So my father would give them credit, and he would write down on a piece of paper how much they owed, and they would sign it with an X because uh, most could not read or write. So at the end of the season, my father was able to recognize every X. He knew who it belonged to, which was fascinating. I don't know how we did it, but our store was at the corner of First and Main. So down First were mostly black families and black stores. and on Main were Caucasian stores. So we were right in the middle. But most of our customers were Black.
Also, like this was interest-free credit. It wasn't like they had a
Oh, yeah.
payback.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And there was like no term, right? Like it's just pay us back. It was kind of an honor system, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think that's remarkable. I mean, we didn't get to expand on it as much in our film, but I think it's something that we get asked about a lot, and so we're always having to explain, because I think people, once they hear credit today, they're like, oh, it's like they charge like 20% interest. I'm like, no, no, that's not how it worked back then. And like, they didn't have to sign their life away, like you say. They just signed an X, and and they knew. At this time, I could talk to you forever about your life in Marks, but I know a lot of people are here to also hear about your career. I want to show a little clip about a performance that you and Patrick Adiardi did on a show called Show Street back in the day. Anything you want to set up this clip with, Virginia?
It's just something that Patrick dreamed up, and we always wanted to do it. And then we had the opportunity to do it.
I won't dance. Don't ask me. I won't dance. Don't ask me. I won't dance with you. My heart won't let my feet do things they should do. I won't dance. Why should I? I won't dance. How could I won't dance. Merci beaucoup. They say that music leads the way to romance. But if he holds me in his arms, I won't dance.
I have referred to myself as an Asian American actor, and I want to identify myself now as an American of Asian descent. So if we all use American first, when they look at us, they won't think we're foreigners.
Why should I? How could I? They say that music leads the way to romance. So if I hold you in my
That's a little sample of some montage. I don't think Virginia's seen that before, of some photos, a little clip promotionally that we put together too, as we've been working on this documentary. And first off, if you're not familiar with Patrick Adiarti, he was in the Flower Drum song. He was a choreographer, a dancer. Was absolutely fantastic, uh,
One, yeah.
and a good friend of yours, I know.
Mm.
Filipino. You also not only were on that show, you appeared on a lot of talk shows in the 1960s, variety shows back in the heyday. In fact, we've been interviewing, various, actors and friends of yours, and they were, it's the 1960s was before my time, and even today, everybody is on their phones, right? Like they're watching TikTok and YouTube, and, we're having to tell people, back in the 1960s, and many of you remember, like that was a big deal. And so when you appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, we actually encountered one of your friends, Fred, who we happened to encounter in Marks, Mississippi that one time we went there. And he just, remember Fred? Like he went off on how, like, oh, we gathered all around the TV and watched. I'm curious, anybody here who's on our Zoom, if any of you saw Virginia when she was on The Tonight Show. Virginia, give us just a little taste of like that experience of going on The Tonight Show.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say to the younger people that in those days they filmed it on kinescope, and it was like a tape recorder. They just taped over shows, and so most of those shows in the 60s were lost. But I was living in the rehearsal club at that point, and that was a two buildings for young actresses, dancers, all women. And I got a call to come and audition for The Tonight Show. So I went in and I sang my song, and they said, "Okay, honey, you're going to be on tonight." And they said, "We film in the afternoon, but it'll be shown on TV at night." So I said, "Well, I don't have anything to wear." They said, "Oh, we'll get you something." They took me to Saks Fifth Avenue and bought me a gown. And I had said, "I don't have any arrangements." And they said, "Oh, don't worry, Skitch Henderson will make the arrangements for you." So when I got to the set that afternoon, Skitch Henderson came over and he says, "Honey, I made you an arrangement. You're going to hear things you've never heard before. Uh, but just keep singing, just keep singing." So we never had even rehearsed the song, and I just kept singing, and that was my first TV appearance, a national TV appearance. The funny thing, I was so young, it, it didn't dawn on me to be afraid
Well, thankfully, there's photos from that appearance, and you still have your dress that's actually sitting
of
at
the dress.
the
Yeah.
Mississippi Delta Chinese Heritage Museum in Cleveland, Mississippi. So if you want to see the dress, you can go to the museum there to find it with a wonderful exhibit. Thankfully, that photo remains, but it is unfortunate that those tapes may have been lost forever because clearly I would have wanted to include that in the documentary. Let's go on to your life, even though I know this happened before you got on the Tonight Show as a beauty pageant queen. So you won the Miss Clinton pageant in Mississippi, and then went on to be, to your knowledge, like the first person of color to compete in the Miss Mississippi pageant. But I'm actually going to ask you about the pageant that came after that, because you entered the Miss Chinatown pageant. And tell us about that experience going from Mississippi to San Francisco.
Oh, wow. It was my first flight across the country. And when I got to San Francisco, it was beautiful, really beautiful flying in. And then I got to San Francisco and went to meet all the people involved. But as I was walking down the street, it was like the only Chinese I had ever seen were my family, my larger family, and a few, well, a lot of teenage friends. But I'd never seen this many Chinese all in one place. And my first impression was, wow, there are a lot of Chinese people here. And then I we were rehearsing, and my uncle said, "Well, I'll take your purse, and I'll guard it while you're, rehearsing." And I said, "No, I gave it to a guy, this man." He said, "Who did you give your purse to?" And I said, "I don't know, but he was Chinese, so he wouldn't steal anything." So that I only knew the Chinese from Mississippi. So I really, and he did give it back. I was okay trusting him. I had never had dim sum for breakfast, and that was my first. Um, I couldn't believe they didn't eat bacon and eggs and biscuits with gravy for breakfast. They ate dim sum, and it was quite an adjustment for me. So out of the cotton fields of Mississippi to Chinatown, it was it was quite a treat. It was wonderful.
Yeah, no, I love that story because, we had the reverse story in Far East Deep South where we went from California and, Baldwin growing up in San Francisco to
Yeah,
Mississippi.
yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to hear your perspective. And I believe Margaret Starner is on this call too. And
Oh,
Margaret Chow
okay.
Starner, she was in that pageant as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah,
So there
yeah.
were actually, interestingly enough, two Mississippians represented. There's so much that we can explore about each aspect of your life, which is why we're making a documentary about it. But I want to show another clip about auditions. I'm going to talk more about now moving from your beauty pageant to your acting and singing career. We're going to show a clip about your attitude towards auditions from something we filmed with you for the documentary.
I don't like to audition because I know what they're going to ask me to do. There was one show I did where they were talking about the people who came on the railroads, and in the 1800s. Well, I know who those people are because they're people from my family. The director wanted very calm Mandarin manners, soft spoken. The Chinese who came then were like, you know, they always sound like they're arguing. I couldn't explain to the guy that that was not those characters. I have been told many times that I need to have an accent. Can you do it with an accent? And I'll say, yes, I can. I can do it with Southern accent. They don't find that funny at all. So I don't get those jobs.
And that is a sneak peek, everybody, of the film "Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing," which I don't think Virginia Wing's seen. It's a very early clip that we edited together of some of our interviews with Virginia. That audition clip was really telling, and in many ways, as we look through your career in retrospective, there were a lot of, unfortunately, and even still to this day, shall we say, more ignorant, observations about that. Um, talk a little bit more about some of those instances where you had to deal with difficult directors or casting directors that really didn't understand what authentic portrayals were.
One that I definitely remember was, I think he might have been the producer, and it was in this huge, beautiful office. And he when I went into audition, he buzzed his secretary and said, these actresses are just too emotional in this scene. He said, tell them just to calm down. And I said, well, sir, the scene is about a woman going home and her house is on fire and her children are in the house. I do believe it would be an emotional scene. And the man says, I lived in Japan for 6 months and I never saw any emotion. And I wanted to vomit. I really did. I just ran out of there and ran home. And I regret forever that I didn't just
Deck
give it up. If it happened today, I would do even worse than this. He would be bloody.
So, I mean, and this was somebody who was Caucasian.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That brings me to your time in Los Angeles and, having to audition for a lot of television roles. And we'll get into some of the roles later, but you did a lot of theater here. I know you did Ace West Players, was Asian American theater, but I want you to talk a little bit more about your experience at the Inner City Cultural Center, because it wasn't until we met and you talked about the Inner City Cultural Center. I live in LA, I grew up in LA. I hadn't heard of it. And as I've been talking to people about your experience, a lot of people haven't heard of it, even a lot of people in the African American community, except for those who, may have worked in the Inner City Cultural Center. They were born out of the Watts riot, and
Yeah.
was a multicultural arts institution. Before there was Hamilton, there was Inner City Cultural Center. Tell us about your experience there and why you enjoyed it so much.
It was wonderful because you could play any role, any gender. It crossed all kinds of boundaries. In one family, it could be Black, Chicano, Japanese, whatever, and nobody blinked. It was for the art and not for all the things that people imposed on people. And it was wonderful. I did Maria in West Side Story, and she was Puerto Rican, but I could play that role. So it was a chance for all actors to cross over and to really understand other cultures, other dialects, other habits of other people. It was very eye-opening for me. And I was, as you mentioned, nominated for Best Actress in a Musical. The story I love to tell is that Fred, oh gosh, I forget his name. Anyway, Fred's mother, Fred was a black actor. His mother was coming from Detroit to see the show one night, and he said she was coming from Detroit, as he said, or Detroit if you was uppity. So anyway, the next morning I said, Fred, how'd your mom like the show? What'd she say? And she said, black people come all kind of ways. That little girl, Virginia, she looks Chinese. And Fred said, Mama, she is Chinese. And his mother said, say what? So the next day, a couple of weeks later, I guess, Saab Shimono, who is a wonderful actor and a friend of mine, called me and said, have you seen the LA Times today? And I said, no. And he said, take a look on page 12. And I had been nominated for Best Actor in a musical. So I thought, oh my God, NAACP thinks I'm black. So I had to march down to the NAACP and CP and tell them that I wasn't black, and only black actors were nominated in those days. So I didn't want to insult anybody. So I went in and explained, and after much talking back in the back room, they came out and said, no, your nomination will stand because we are the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and we have decided that you are a colored person. So that's how I was nominated for that. And I've never been so honored in my life.
That's wonderful. And we're actually trying to interview somebody from the NAACP Image Awards to kind of comment on that, because yours wasn't the only nomination where it wasn't somebody black, where they actually were recognizing people of color, because at those times, people of color were largely shut out of lead roles, largely not recognized by the Emmys or the Oscars. And even today, it's sometimes a struggle. We have some progress, but then it's still not necessarily the norm. Going back to the history and roots of Mississippi, legally during certain periods, the Chinese were actually labeled as deemed legally not white.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack there in the story, and hopefully we'll get into some of those nuances in this new film as well. Um, I want to talk about some other stereotyping. I mean, which is why Inner City Cultural Center or East West Players was so refreshing, because you could play lead roles in non-stereotyped ways. So there was an episode of Hawaii 5-0 that you appeared in, and I watched it recently. I don't know if you've seen it, but your son Jeff actually talks about it when I interviewed him, and he actually directed the reboot, an episode in the newer version, which was interesting, full circle moment that you appeared on an early episode with the Jack Lord version. So I watched it, and I kind of watched slightly in horror because you played a Japanese American woman, which was fine because you actually didn't have to have an accent, which was great. But you got kidnapped by this man who was Japanese from Japan, who thought you were his like ex-wife, or and he was a Caucasian man wearing.
Plastic eyes.
Talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit more, and how that wasn't necessarily the first time that's happened in your career.
Yeah, well, that was in the 60s. And I had done a lot of flower drum songs where Linda Lowe was a Caucasian with plastic eyes. And at that point, I'm not sure if we were as adamant about it or as enraged about it as we are now. And I totally regret not being more um, more
Well,
intelligent about the whole thing. Yeah,
but I
yeah,
do know in later years, because I saw some of those letters when I was going through your things, like you and some other Asian American actors started to write in more letters,
yeah. Oh yeah. Mm.
um, and in many ways, you and those actors started to, lead the way a little bit more in terms of voicing your opinions
Yeah, yeah.
about. In fact, there was a show that I hadn't heard about it is called Con at one point that you mentioned you helped you there was a letter writing campaign where there was a a very there was a man that was cast that was not Chinese, explicitly
Mhm.
Chinese, that got canceled.
Yeah,
And so there was a lot of progress. Talk about Chu Chem. That was supposed to be your big Broadway break,
yeah.
and that story is a little fascinating. Talk a little bit about that because I keep asking, having people ask me like, was she on Broadway? I was like, she was almost on Broadway, and then things fell apart.
Yeah, Chu Chem was a fascinating story. There was a village named Kai Fing Fu, way up in the mountains in China, and they the people looked Chinese, but they wore yarmulkes and they had payas and they had um, the they spoke Hebrew, I believe, and they had been there. They think they might have been one of the lost tribes. Um, they're not quite sure how they got there, but they had been there for hundreds of years. And then they had married Chinese. Uh, they were Jewish, of course, and married Chinese. And then through the years, um, they they looked Chinese, but they were Jewish. So this Chu Chem was about that story. And Molly Pekin and Menashe Skolnick were the king and queen of Yiddish theater. So they played the leads of the Jewish people. And then Jimmy Shigeta, who became a very close friend, and Patrick Ariarte, and Robert Ito were in it, were the Chinese people and me. It was a beautiful, beautiful show. And we got to Philadelphia, uh, and Menashe and Molly just were crazy. If she did a somersault, he had to do a somersault. If she got this particular song, he had to get a particular. They just fought and fought and fought. And finally, the show had been totally paid for from tickets already sold. Um, they canceled the show. It was heartbreaking. It really was heartbreaking. That was 1967. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know that was like a massive disappointment. And we'll cover some of that because you have a lot of highlights, but of course, part of what makes life fascinating is it's the highs and the lows. Um, there's another one that I won't have you comment, but I'll just let the audience know, and then I want to talk about Uncle Vanya. But there was another play you were supposed to do in 2020. You were supposed to do a play of three sisters starring some actors like Oscar Isaac and Greta Gerwig and Steve Buscemi that was supposed to be on Broadway. And
Well,
it was off Broadway.
it was off Broadway, but it was for sure going to go to Broadway. Yeah.
And that's a huge cast, like well-known, like today's movie stars. And
Yeah.
then the pandemic happened, right? um, and I know you were heartbroken about that. But Uncle Vanya came along after that. Tell us about the production of Uncle Vanya that you were in.
Uncle Vanya was done in a loft, and the first time we did it, only 40 people in the audience. So they sat around, and it was like they were in our living room watching this family go through their dramas. And in the cast was David Cromer, who directed The Band uh, and won a Tony for directing that. Bill Irwin, who has won everything in the world. Everybody.
He actually won a Tony for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
I know.
Interesting enough.
I didn't
And
know that.
and I when I told him, I got to interview him, and I this is another long story. I won't take up time telling, but I fangirled because I was a huge fan of Bill Irwin's, and when I interviewed him, I told him the title of your film, and he just lit up. Anyway, so keep going.
And Will Brill just won a Tony, and Will Dagger, who is at this point in the new George Clooney show that's going to open this month sometime. And David Cromer, who won a Tony for The Band's Visit, is directing that show with George Clooney called Good Night and Good Luck. Every other person was just wonderful. Just we were sold out. We went to another loft with 90 people in the audience, sold out every night. People were lined up around the blocks to get in, and many when afterwards the producer told us he had a waiting list of people who wanted to see it, who didn't get to see it. 3,700 people on the waiting list. So it was like a really hot show. But the wonderful thing about it is we've all kept up with each other. So we became a family, and we still go to everybody's show, that as a group sometimes when we can, and go out afterwards and just hang out. Yeah. It was wonderful. It's a great experience.
And I know you had invited me to come out to see it, and I do in many ways. Wish I could have come and seen it before it closed. We can talk for hours about your career, and there's so much more to unpack, which is why we're working on Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing, the documentary. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the film, because I know many of you have come to learn more. Some of you have supported the film already, and I wanted to give you just a quick update, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to start putting them in the chat box. For those of you who don't know, we're doing a documentary about the life and career of Virginia Wing called Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing? These are the many faces and the many facets. We just only got a little taste of it today. Next slide. And we are delighted to be showing here. By the way, that's the dress that I mentioned about the Johnny Carson show and the exhibit at the museum at the Mississippi Delta Chinese Heritage Museum. A plug for them right there. And so it offers a revealing exploration of the history of stereotyping, sexism, ageism on stage and screen through the eyes of octogenarian Virginia Wing, a trailblazing Chinese-American actress and former Mississippi beauty queen. We're going to dive into her life as a young actress, facing limited and often stereotypical roles, but also to her career today in contemporary theater, but, and beyond. So as you can see, she's got lots and lots of stories to tell. We're going to have not only her talking about her stories, but some of her friends, as mentioned. I'll show you a few more of her friends later on who will be on camera talking about it. And we've got some historians and other experts in this field who will be commenting about not just Virginia's career, but also how her life and career is in a mirror of the history that's not told from Mississippi, but also the histories that's not told from the Asian American in entertainment perspective. Some of the themes we really want to counter the perpetual foreigner stereotype that unfortunately still persists today. As Virginia, you saw in a clip earlier, she talked about people asking her to do an accent, and those of us who work in entertainment, I've asked to do an accent or to play an immigrant mom, even though both Virginia and I are born here in the United States. We want to expand the history of Chinese Americans in the South. As mentioned, we know there's so many more stories to tell from the American South and the Mississippi Chinese and beyond, that we don't want it to be limited to just one film like Far East Deep South, but we want it to be more stories. We want to expose the barriers that were faced by Asian American women historically and even today, challenge the stereotypes of Asian women, highlight the shared histories with other communities of color. Virginia shared about her experience with the Inner City Cultural Center. We'll go more in depth in the film about that, as well as other parts of her life that intersected with other communities of color. And of course, we want to celebrate Virginia's legacy in the arts. Impact, that's always what we're about. You know, we don't make films just to be entertaining. We want them to be entertaining. We want them to be educational, but more importantly, we want them to have an impact. We want to educate and spark a dialogue on representation. We want to advocate for greater diversity in storytelling. And diversity, not just meaning more Asian American stories, but even geographically. We want stories that are from Mississippi, from Ohio, from Minnesota, from Iowa. Like, we know Chinese and Asians are in other parts of the country, and many times they're only relegated to a small portion of, whether it's California or New York. And of course, generationally, we have stories from the 1800s, 1900s, so many decades that are worth telling. We want to reduce racial and gender bias. We want to inspire future generations of artists. A lot of why I'm making the film is because I wanted to go into theater as a young Chinese American girl, but I thought I had no future because I didn't know about Virginia Wings. I didn't know about her story. I didn't know it was possible. And then, of course, we want to preserve cultural and historical legacy. If we don't document the stories, sometimes other people do not do this work if there's no vested interest. And so we think it's so important to have this for future generations to come. Our team, it's me, I'm directing and producing this documentary, Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing, alongside my husband and co-producer, Baldwin Chu, who dropped in momentarily in the chat, who many of you've known and have seen his family story in Far East Deep South. These are just some of the members of our production team. Cliff Jones, who's currently in Atlanta shooting a film, but he works on a lot of Disney shows. He's worked on a lot of network television shows over the years. He's an amazing cinematographer. We also have another cinematographer from Mississippi, Coop Cooper, who works with us. Corey Ohama as an editor who's working with us, who's worked on numerous shows for PBS. Some key contributors, some of them I think are on this call right now. We're going to get to hear from Virginia's kids, Jennifer Lee Schatz and Jeff Wing Schatz as well. Jen is a successful New York Times bestselling author, and Jeff is a television producer and director. We mentioned the fabulous Bill Irwin. This is for those of you who are familiar with Sesame Street. This was coincidental, but Bill Irwin played Mr. Noodle on Sesame Street, and Alan Moroka, who is Alan from Sesame Street, are both appearing in the film, and it was just coincidental that I had two Sesame Street people on there. Bjork Lee, who was one of the original cast members of A Chorus Line, and a founder of an Asian American theater organization in New York, and a good friend of Virginia's, is on there. Lainey Sakakura, who is a Tony-nominated Broadway producer, consulting on this with us, and for some of them are appearing on camera. Nancy Wong Yoon, who's an author of Real Inequality, talking about representation in entertainment, and Judy Tsuchun Wu, who is a professor of history and Asian American studies at UC Irvine, and Ernest Dillahay, who is one of the he's on the executive board at the Inner City Cultural Center, who's been a wonderful source of just information and consultation. I'm hoping to get him on camera as well as many others that are not listed here. Most of you on this call have been supporting Far East Deep South, many from the very, very beginning. Some of you are actually in our film. I see some of you on here. Our cast members are here. We released the film in 2020, and if you've been tracking our progress, we've aired on PBS. We are streaming on Tubi, Comcast, Canopy, and we're going to be adding some more outlets in this coming year, soon to be announced. So stay tuned. We have partnered with over 400 organizations, schools, museums, and institutions, and conferences and companies to screen Far East Deep South. And we're looking to do the same with Virginia's film. We've had press coverage in a lot of different major media outlets like USA Today and NBC. And because of the interest in Far East Deep South, some of the organizations that are already asking, when's your next movie coming out? When's your next movie coming out? We'd love to show it. We're ready to screen it. And when they hear about Virginia's story, they're very, very excited. So we have a ton of people, just clamoring to hear the story. We have been filming in different locations. We're actually going to do a trip to New York next month to do some additional filming. And we have additional filming to do in Los Angeles, and we may be doing some additional filming in Mississippi as well. I've talked a little bit about the project, but ways you can help. Many of you on this call have already contributed to the film, and I'm very, very, very happy and grateful for that. We are continuing to fundraise for this campaign. A typical budget for a documentary that's Oscar nominated is anywhere from $1 million to $3 million. We're not trying to raise that type of money, but we still are trying to make a high caliber film. So our budget is about $400,000 right now. So we've raised we've had raised and pledged about a fourth, not quite, of that amount of money. But this next phase, we are trying to get an additional $100,000 to get into the editing phase of our film and to complete the production. And we are excited to announce that we did receive a small grant from the Mississippi Humanities Council, and it is a matching grant. So how you can help, the easy way, of course, is to contribute to the campaign for the film. If you aren't able to financially support, that's okay. If you know of foundations, if you know of individuals or organizations that you believe can contribute, we are currently with the Fiscal Sponsor Center for Independent Documentary, which is a nonprofit organization. And so people can make contributions tax deductible to the film through our fiscal sponsor. You can also volunteer your time or talent. We've actually been able to save. So even though I said the budget is $400,000, it may actually come under that because we've had people being able to loan us things like location spaces for filming. So that's an example of how we've been able to save money. So you can actually donate your resources in kind. So if you got some website talents or know somebody that might be willing to donate their time, that's another way that will help us in saving our budget. Graphic design, legal, there's so many other aspects of the filmmaking that go into the budget that we welcome those who might be able to volunteer, and that's another way to contribute to the film. If you hadn't have an opportunity to contribute to the film, these are just different levels that you can partner with us. If you want to be an executive producer on the film at a level of $50,000 or more, you can be an executive producer on the film. So these are just some incentives. I know for most people that are investing in contributing to our film and partnering with us, it's because you see the value in the story. You see the social impact that we're making with not just Far East Deep South, but for this film. And we're leaving a legacy for many, many generations to come. That we hope that Virginia's story isn't just for Chinese Americans. It's not just for people in Mississippi. It's for people of every background, every age, everywhere around the country and even around the world. I do see one question. What is the time frame for the film coming out? That is a great question. Part of that is dependent on how much funding we get to be able to complete the editing process and post-production. We are hoping to finish by the end of the year. I want Virginia to be able to do a tour with the film and to be able to go to all the film festivals. She's very healthy now, so I'm hoping she stays around forever and ever. But I do want her to be physically capable to travel with the film. To be on panels. So yes, we're hoping to finish the film production-wise by the end of the year, which means it will debut next year. Hopefully a spring festival debut. That's our timeline, our goal. Another question. I'm interested in hearing more about your relationships with the African American and white peers that you're growing up in Marks. Did you go out together, do things together? Thanks.
I'm ashamed to say that I was so driven to be accepted in the white community that I didn't have any black friends in Marks. One woman who took care of us when we were young, Jady, was very close to her. But it was extremely segregated at that point. But white friends, yes, I had a bunch, yeah. But I guess I made up for it in my later life when I have so many black friends at this point. Yeah.
You know what's interesting? I think you told me that, and this is something that we explore in the film on camera. Is that yeah? And it was after you left Mississippi that a lot of your friends were actually African American.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm gonna just name drop really quick, and you feel free to like fill in the blanks. So this is a question like so Quincy Jones, who was a hero of mine as a music producer, recently passed away.
Yeah.
And I remember we having this conversation even before he passed, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I used to hang out with Quincy Jones and Cannonball Adderley." And just talk a little bit about that in your time.
Yeah, one of my very, very close friends was Olga James, who was on Broadway with Sammy Davis Jr. She was in the film
I think the film was Carmen Jones. Was that?
Carmen Jones. Yes, yes. She was an opera singer actually, and she was married to Cannonball Adderley. So after he passed, she had this house up in the Hollywood Hills somewhere, and people at the party or at the gathering was Quincy Jones and his wife, gosh, what was her name?
Was it Peggy Lipton or was
Peggy
it?
Lipton,
Okay.
who was pregnant on the couch with one of the girls. I forget which one. And Olga was a godmother to one of Quincy's Q. We called him Q, Q's daughters. And I was having an argument with a guy named Pete Long, uh, who is a character. And we were arguing, and this couple walked in, and Olga said, "Yeah, Virginia, this is hi, Jane, hi, Tom." And I continued to argue with Pete, and then I realized Tom and Jane. That's Jane Fonda and Tom, one of her husbands, who was
Yeah,
one
I'm
of
blanking on his last name too, but it was one of her. Yeah.
507, right? And I'm still arguing, and I'm going, oh my God, what am I doing? I ignored them completely. But Q, I did meet there.
Yeah. And it's Tom Hayden. Thank you,
Hey.
Bobby. Bobby Moon. Always good for the information. One thing I forgot to mention, and I think we have one more question here, is we just launched your social media. So if you are on social media, we have a Facebook and an Instagram page. And so we encourage you to like Virginia Wing's Virginia Wing film, for Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing. And so we've got one last question here before we wrap things up. Did you get to meet up often with the ethnic Chinese population across the Mississippi Delta? I have many cousins who grew up in grocery stores in Greenwood and was curious about how relationships were with the other families in the other towns. Were there many get-togethers or events?
As teenagers, we had dances all the time, and there would be maybe 200 teenage Chinese kids at the dances. So yeah, we did hang out a lot. We went to Sardis Dam a lot together. Hush Puppies and Black Eyed Peas and uh, uh, yeah, Catfish. We did hang out a lot. As far as the families, my family hung out mostly with the other 11 children.
There was a lot of you guys.
There were a lot of us, yeah. Christmas, there would be Christmas presents up to the ceiling because everybody gave everybody else a present. And Uncle Andy was always Santa Claus, and we never figured out that Santa Claus was Chinese.
Well, one of the things is we did interview a couple of your friends. Margaret, who was on here, was one of Margaret Starner. But we interviewed, this is a little juicy scoop. So we interviewed your very first boyfriend, Peter Joe. He's going to appear in the film, and he talks quite a bit about the social life and the dancing. And there's one aspect that we didn't get into in Far East Deep South that I I'm glad that question was asked, because I wanted to show that side of the Mississippi Chinese, even though, you know, a lot of hours were spent in the store, you know, and not as much fun, but certainly the youth did have their time to be able to socialize, and I wanted to show that aspect very much so through your story. Thank you so much for joining us. We, you know, encourage you to consider contributing to the film however you can, to help us see this through, to complete Virginia Wing's amazing story. In the meantime, we are going to hang around for a few more minutes afterwards if more of you have questions. But this concludes the official part of our talk, our Meet Virginia talk today. And I'm so glad to see a lot of familiar names and faces with us today. And again, thank you so much for all your support so far, not just with Virginia's film, but going back to Far East, Deep South. And of course, thanks to Virginia Wing for being the amazing person that she is, and dealing with me asking her a gazillion questions, not just today, but through the course of making this documentary.
You're wonderful. You really are.
Stay tuned for more information and updates about Who's Afraid of Virginia Wing, and we hope you'll consider partnering with us to help get this film made, and so that Virginia's stories is told and all the important messages we want to send to the world and make that impact on the next generation. Thank you again.